All right. I am so excited about our next guest. I'm just going to go ahead and tee him up. Uh, our next guest is Mr. Rob Lee. Rob is our Chief Curriculum Director and faculty lead at SANS Institute, and he runs his own consulting business specializing in information security, incident response, threat hunting, and digital forensics. He's got more than 20 years of experience in digital forensics, vulnerability and exploit discovery, intrusion detection and prevention, and incident response. And he's known as the godfather of DeFi. He's co-authored the book Know Your Enemy and is course author of SANS Forensics 500 and Forensics 508. He's also a mentor, a leader. I consider him a friend. Rob, thank you so much for being here and sharing some time with us today.
Hey, thanks, Stephen. It's my pleasure to be here, and really proud to be here on the healthcare forum. The topic here, and security strategy is actually near and dear to my heart because I've been doing this for a long time, and always been asked a lot of questions on security strategy from a lot of different individuals, from those just starting out and managers of teams, CISOs, all the way up to executives of a lot of organizations, a lot of small businesses too. Just like are trying to figure out, like, how do I do security in general? There's a lot of questions out there in the community in general. Just trying to wrap your heads around what do we do? Healthcare, in particular, is a really one of these fields that when you look at it holistically, from the industry as from what it encompasses and what it touches, from pharmaceuticals to hospitals to formulas. I've talked to people done incident response during the COVID response, where the formulas for a lot of the vaccinations were under a lot of pressure from nation state attackers that were being stolen during the earlier onsets of COVID. It's just really interesting to see how a lot of organizations responded to a lot of these attacks. And so when you talk about security strategy in general, one of the things you go down to the general principles. You just got to look at the basics. And now, I don't have slides I'm going to put up because the slides would be just very basic slides. The slide would I would start with one slide with the one word that I would put up on the slide. And the first slide I would put up would just be, let's chat about people first. And that's where I'm going to start is, when you start talking about people in your organization, it's the bedrock of your strategy. And all of your security strategy really comes down to who's your team, how do you get your team, how do you recruit your team, how do you train your team, where do they come from, where are they going to go, how do you manage them, and so forth. And so, for a lot of organizations, this ends up being more difficult than most people realize. It's, you're obviously, you're not going to go, put an ad in a paper and say, hey, we're looking for security people, please apply, take anyone off the street, or coming into your local healthcare facility, come secure all of our devices from ransomware attacks and, from all the vulnerabilities. Red team our stuff, we'll take anyone. There's a lot of different types of individuals with different skill sets that you're going to need to be able to form your team. So if you're starting from scratch, which most organizations aren't, but even if you're starting from scratch, you're going to need to, obviously need to have a really strong leadership team in place. And that leadership team is going to need to sketch out from a strategy perspective, what are we doing? What is it that we're defending? Now, luckily, one of the things that, most healthcare organizations are probably going to be looking at today, especially in a post-COVID organization, is unlike a lot of our other organizations that are out there that have had a lot of the transition from on-prem facilities to off-prem, lot of organizations in healthcare are probably in a more of an amalgamated state, that you have a lot of on-prem devices and systems in addition to off-prem, and a lot of supply chain connections that you're going to also have to potentially worry about as well. These interconnections, potentially definitively increase your risk across the board. So being able to manage all of this is going to, be increasingly worrisome. Now, you're going to have in 1 year, should we invest in a lot of, managed security services? Should we invest in a lot of devices? You're going to have, what is my budget that is going to be put on me? You're going to have, how much money am I going to be able to hire? From a organizational standpoint, you also have this, mindset behind the scenes that, unlike, when your IT budget is set and you have, hey, we have money to spend on things, the security budget, and no one ever sees security as, hey, that's the fun dollars you get to spend on devices. Everyone wants to walk around with the latest technology and devices that are going to be able to have the latest iPhones, that you're going to be able to scan a wristband, put a prescription in, that's going to be able to order it and have it delivered on site immediately to help out the patients. This is like, some of the latest technologies that exist. This is cool stuff. The hard part is that security dollars are never fun dollars. And, that's the adage that I tell a lot of executives and managers out there. It's like, no one ever is excited about, hey, we're implementing the latest 2-factor authentication protocols. Everyone's like, yay? No, that's never the exciting thing you ever hear from anyone. We're implementing the things that are going to make your life difficult, the latest encryption, the latest things that are going to make you jump through an additional hoop. That's going to be able to do this. But, security doesn't need to be making life more difficult in a lot of instances. A lot of cases, security can be implemented transparently. And that's where having the right workforce in place to be able to do so. So really spending some time and trying to outline what is the workforce that you need in place to be able to do this. Now, you could go hire, on one end, extremely expensive folks, but you're obviously going to need an amalgamation, and I use this word probably too much in my presentations, of junior, mid, senior, and management to be able to help drive the workforce, and across the niches of, from incident response, blue team, with the defenders. And the question is, do you have to have on-premise a red team, or is that something you're going to outsource? What is outsourced? Do you want on-prem? And, like hired internally, full-time staff. And these are some of the, the key questions that you're going to have from your workforce management perspective. So it's hard for a lot of organizations, because this might change over the years. How much of this stuff that you're also keeping up with the latest technologies from 5 years ago to what you're doing today. I imagine a lot of what you're potentially defending has definitively changed. A lot of things that were on-prem before are potentially now in the cloud. How much of that are you potentially going to be defending in the cloud? Security strategy should have changed. So you need to potentially always have, at least on a yearly basis, a look at your workforce management from a what are we defending to are we organized properly? Do we have the right management workforce in place? And at what point do we need to potentially outsource some of that to other organizations to potentially help us defend that if we don't have the right skill set in place? And there's no right solution to any of this. It is really hard for organizations to understand, A, what is it we're defending? B, do we have the right workforce in place? And C, is there anything that left that we're going to be potentially surprised with in the end, that we have this big oops moment? Even take with what's happened this past week. If you're Uber, Uber, you are one of the most well-funded organizations on the planet. And if you looked at all the job recs that were just dropped on Twitter, they're hiring like mad incident responders to come in and help out. And no kidding, but again, it's like, can you potentially hire as fast as possible? No, you can't. Even they, in as much as they had dedicated SOC, dedicated incident response, they still, were not even prepared for that. Now, were they wrong? No. they're not in a situation where people are finger wagging at them and saying, well, they should have known. Every organization, is going to be faced with the situation that no matter how well prepared, how well thought out you are, and how well prepared your workforce is, you're still going to be in a situation like Uber, and you just feel bad for them, because you'll also be faced with this. The best thing you could do is think ahead, make sure you're planning, make sure you're looking at the current technologies that you're using to defend things, and just don't rely on technology, and just don't rely on the outsourcing of everything. Make sure you have dedicated staff and talent in place to be able to do it. But workforce management is something that you should focus in on, probably number one in your organizations from a security strategy standpoint. Now, as a part of the workforce management, a lot of people tend to approach this, one of two ways. Number one is, let's just hire smart people and let them figure it out. And I typically frown on that a little bit, because when I ask organizations, what is your workforce management strategy? They tend to not really know or have an idea what that means. Do you have the right people in place? Do you have the right silos in place? What is the right mix of, the right niche skills that you have to defend your organization? Do you have the right auditing teams in place? Do you have the right, those implementing the policies, the right IT staff in place to be able to implement the right devices, management of those devices and securing those devices that way that you don't have, unpatched, unsecured devices, even when the patch comes out, just for something simple, like in some of our previous conversations that we had earlier, just something as simple as vulnerability management, patch management. These are some of the basic security hygiene stuff that must happen. Someone's job has to be doing that. So you have to hire people that are in charge of that task, that is trained with those skills, that are able to deploy it in an easy manner across your organization, across on-prem and off-prem devices, and across your supply chain. Because even through your supply chain, your partners are going to also need to be secured to be able to manage that. As a part of that, you also have to take a look at, how do you retain these individuals once you hire them? One of the things I mentioned to a lot of organizations that are out there is that when you're hiring someone in your 20s, it's a lot different than when you're hiring someone in their 40s and even early 50s. And I'm not using the generational terms intentionally here, the individuals, what they focus on for benefits in their 20s are much different than what they focus on for benefits in their 40s and 50s. And we can't just look at the simple HR packages and one size fits all. You have to take a look at what is important for someone in their careers in their 20s and early 30s versus someone in their 40s and 50s. 40s and 50s 401k packages may be really important, but in 20s and 30s, the likelihood that they're thinking this is a 10-year career is unlikely to occur. The average individual in cybersecurity sitting in a single company is on average 3 years. And you have to almost accept that. You probably will have that individual 3 years in your organization. Plan for it. So could you potentially extend it a year? Doesn't mean don't invest in them, but how would you make sure that they stay there and are doing their jobs correctly and before they move on to somewhere else? And it's just the nature of the averages that you potentially see with someone in the junior to mid-level roles in your organizations. One of the things I hear routinely in a lot of those in their early careers is training and the ability for upward technology growth is something that is really attractive to those individuals early in their careers. They want to learn. They want to be exposed to opportunities that will challenge them. Once they learn something, if they start feeling like they're doing rote work and it's repetitive, and they start to become, well, I feel like I'm flipping burgers, especially when they want to be challenged and they want to learn and they want to be, on a daily basis, they want to be like, I want to come in with that passion. This is where they will start looking over the fence saying, well, where can I get another challenge? This is where they'll go to another company to get that challenge. And a little bit later on, they'll go to another company. They will flip companies to consistently be challenged until they finally land in a company that says, well, I'm a manager now, and now I'm going to run a team. And this is something, again, a lot of organizations have to look at. It's like from workforce management is, almost have to expect I'm going to have these individuals from a junior to mid. I would probably have them on average, maybe 3 years. You might be able to extend it to 4. So you might need to plan for that a little bit. So how do we develop these individuals? How do we potentially plan for workforce management? Now, what about your mid to senior level types? Again, what is your plan for them? What is your development? How are you potentially keeping them on board? What are your packages? That those individuals are harder to replace because they're walking around with the historian knowledge of your organization that is going to keep everyone in place. And the historians, that they've seen the organization migrate. They know where the dust is. They know the people that have come and gone, and some of the stories, the reasons why things exist. They know about the cracks in the wall, and as a result of that, their knowledge is almost as valuable as their experience. And that's, again, those two things, that the historical knowledge of why things are the way they are, and also the ability to get things done quickly, is that when things happen, they're going to know, I need to go talk to X. And someone new is not going to know that. That individual will know that. And that alone, in some cases, is worth why we're trying to make sure that they stay on the team. So workforce management is a key part of security strategy. And it's something that I really lean on managers talking about is, what is your plan? How are you sticking to that plan? And how are you cultivating that plan in workforce management, at least on a yearly basis? But layered into that plan is really talking about what is it you're defending and how is that consistently migrating? And that is a consistently working with the current IT team and the security team to make sure they're in lockstep to know what is coming in the door and what is going out the door. Usually there's more coming in the door that's leaving than that's leaving, but the stuff that's coming in the door, the new tech that's coming in the door, new wireless things that are coming there, new things that are coming from the cloud, the new connections, the new data sources, new things that are being required to do from a compliance standpoint, the new regulatory stuff that we're required to do, all these things that are layered on top of it. Someone has to be looking at all this stuff. And as a result, it becomes mind-blowing, but it's somewhat, you're trying to continue to work on all this stuff is really hard to do. So at least on a yearly basis, trying to figure out that workforce on top of the technology ends up being a full-time job in of itself. And I think a lot of you know that. And that's one of the reasons why just planning consistent workforce updates is something that's hard, because then you're layering on the budget, then you're layering on, do we have the right tools? Then you're layering on, well, I have to go back and beg for more money to be able to hire more people, hire more capabilities, and you never have enough. You never have enough. And that's the hard part. It's like you're always feeling like, well, I can't do it with the amount of money that I have. And we're all in that situation. There's never enough budget in order to get the job done. And that's, that's one theme I always had. It's like, I need 3 more people and I'm only given 2. And it's a really frustrating thing when people go through it here. All right, I'm just seeing if there's any questions in there. All right. On the strategy side, one thing I also tell a lot of organizations to do, let me take a drink of water. And this is important. A lot of folks just focus on, or a lot of organizations, especially in the healthcare side, they focus on just looking for the vulnerabilities in the organization. They want to know, are we susceptible to ransomware attacks? Are we susceptible to, where is our weak spot? How would someone actually break into our organization? There's a lot of focus out there now on really seeing how the organization will react in a tabletop exercise. One of the recommendations that I have, a lot of organizations that tend to have a lot of staff, organizations that could be greatly affected by an intrusion of large scale. That could affect patients, it could affect any number of systems, could make the news. could make headlines, national news, local news, papers, that kind of thing. I always tell them it's worth your time to invest in, what a lot of organizations call tabletop red team exercises. And usually you have to go outside and hire a consulting firm to be able to do that. And there are a lot of them out there that do engage in this, CrowdStrike, Mandiant, and others. It doesn't, IBM does them as well. And they're all extremely good at them. You just go in, they'll consult with you for a little bit, get to know your organization, get to know your layout, your key personnel, and they'll come in and they'll stage an incident. And they'll have almost like a choose your own adventure style situation in which, you're not going to know exactly what will happen based off of that scenario, but they'll stage it in a way to see how the organization will react based off of presenting you with an initial scenario and then have the organization react in real time the way you should react during an actual incident. So they might say, you're hit with a ransomware, your systems are down, this is now a X incident. And then watch how you react and start doing these things called injects based off of your reactions. So if you react one way versus react B way, that the inject might change based off of that. If you're hit with a ransom, do you pay the ransom, not pay the ransom? Or if you, shut a system down, not shut a system down. All of these storylines, pre-planned out, even dialed to your organization, depending on how much of it you want it cultivated directly to it. This is worth the weight in gold that you're paying for these, because in many cases, you're really able to watch how your organization and how the staff and personnel react through the situation. And it's not just how's your technology going to react, it's how your policy, procedures, and staff actually handle in real time the overall incident that is about to take place. And this is, again, one of those, do the things work the way you expect them to work, in the way and order that you expected them to work in your head. In almost every single situation, just like in a wargaming situation, that you have country A attack country B, nothing ever works out the way you think it does. And in these situations, when you wargame an actual incident, especially in a very sensitive situation and a healthcare situation, very similarly, you can imagine how things go from a pucker factor 1 to a pucker factor 9 situation almost immediately. So as a result of these red team and tabletop exercises, I have found, just by getting feedback and watching these and participating on these when I was back at Mandiant and other organizations, I've seen a lot of organizations, take those learnings and start to say, hey, we need to do these on an annual basis, just because it teaches us, number one, it adds stress to see how people react to the scenario because of the unexpected. But B, it also shows us if our policies and procedures in place are actually adequate. Are we actually effectively trained to the point where we're following what we actually would possibly do from not only our internal policies, but like our public affairs? Are we actually releasing things at the right time and telling the public what we should be doing at the right time at that point too? So there's a lot of back and forth that we end up potentially taking a look at when we end up doing these tabletop exercises, and they're really worth their weight in gold. So I really advise, from a strategy standpoint, that if you can do it, to really take a look at those. Trying to see if there's any comments in here. See some people having problems with some of the YouTube streaming, but looks like we're okay now. All right. Now, the other thing I always like to talk about, especially in the strategy side, and it goes back to the policy side, and this again is more of a, when you're taking a look on the, from a security strategy standpoint, And this is like going to be my third point, and I'll circle back to the people one here on my final point to close things off, is when you're talking about the policy in a lot of organizations, I find a lot of organizations over policy themselves. Like their policies are as thick as a book when it comes to what they're trying to actually implement. They come in, and in many instances, that their security policy is overly restrictive from what is their incident response policy? It has way too much, not enough, you're someone trying to follow it gets confused. And what actually happens during an actual incident, or people try to follow something, it is overly burdensome and usually is the first thing that's thrown out the door. And you ask later, it's like, during your after action report, I said, so how much of that policy did you actually follow? And people are like, well, I don't know. The policy was there from almost a compliance standpoint, but you go back and actually say, okay, on page 14, during an incident, you're supposed to contact these 18 individuals. Were these 18 individuals contacted? No, none of those individuals were contacted. Okay, well, on security policy implementation standpoint, this was written 3 years ago. Every device that's brought in a building will go through X. Is every device that enters the building, is it scanned for antivirus using Norton? No, I don't think anything's done that. So it's a lot of policies are written from almost a compliance standpoint, a checkbox, and then they're like shoved on a corner, and then not many people actually follow them anymore. So what's the point of having that policy? Otherwise, hey, it's following some sort of compliance standard, but we're not actually moving it into an actual usability standard. And so, be really careful with that. It's like policies actually are useful if you write them to be useful. And that's a really good rule. If you think about it, is actually write a policy that it's actually useful. Write a policy that actually is going to work for you. Don't just write a policy from a compliance standpoint and then just say, okay, that's really weighty, push it off to the side. Write something that actually works, that's going to help your organization out and going to propel your organization to mitigate disasters, to help avoid disasters, and help you during actual incidents. And there's a lot of experts out there that'll help you get there. But if you're just writing policies that are just trying to avoid the compliance eye of Sauron from hitting you, it's not going to help you or your organization at all. It's because that's the first thing that is going to be shelved. And during actual things where you're going to need a policy or a structure, it's basically the bad news bears trying to run around the bases with no coaching. It's like the policies are there for a reason. It gives you a structure to the order of battle, to the order of events that should occur, and it gives you a framework to rely on when things do go bad. And that's one of the reasons why we do rely on a lot of these policies. It's like, yes, we have a policy to enforce it. Yes, we have a policy. Yeah, it's like, that's what a LinkedIn user said. I love that. Your security policy is as good as your policies. Yeah, exactly. Ryan Chapman says, per my security policies all over the place. And that's, again, all over the place. Like, it's the one thing I always find is like a security policy, where is it? It's like it's a doorstop somewhere. And I always wonder about like the policies. I was like, why write policies if they're not going to be used? And it's like, write a policy that's thin, like it's as thin as these papers right here, and something that is actually usable. And again, I've gone into organizations in the past. They said, write something for incident response that is clean, it gives authority, it is clear, and gets the job done. And I said, test it, go through a red team exercise, and that people could rely on these things. All right, so the final thing I'm going to mention in a strategy, and it actually ties back to number one with the people, it goes, one thing that I've seen, especially recently and coming out of COVID, and I'm just going to mention it just because there is a tie into this, and I'm seeing this especially across the cybersecurity industry. And I'll mention it here because it is applicable not just in healthcare, but it's applicable across the entire cybersecurity industry. And that is tying it into culture of the organization. And the thing that I'm seeing, and I'm hearing from a lot of my friends out there, who work in the cybersecurity industry, is that the reason why a lot of people are resigning from companies and moving on to other companies is not because of salary. A lot of people are sitting there saying, oh, they could get bigger salary somewhere else. That's why they're leaving. They're not happy or anything else. The reason why most individuals are leaving organizations and going to another organization is because of culture. And specifically, and I hate to use the term, but the terminology that a lot of folks are using out there is a toxic culture. And you really, as a manager out there in a lot of organizations, you really have to potentially be on the lookout for that. Is, you know, maybe it's an offset of what's happened out of COVID, or just because people become a lot more relaxed about things, but just really keep your pulse on things in the organization, how people are, you know, looking at each other and, you know, trying to redefine like the workplace environment and to make sure people are okay, and to focus on this, because a lot of exit surveys that we're finding out there when people are leaving, and just talking to my friends, why'd you leave? And just said, the workplace has become different. The culture became different. And I don't like it anymore. And it's surprising to me, you know, but again, that's almost the number one reason a lot of people are leaving. And, you know, again, it goes back into, you know, workforce management is the number one priority for a lot of people that are out there. And I just like to highlight that one for a lot of organizations when you're talking about this to folks, when you're in your organizations. You know, people always focus on it, salary, salary, salary. It's like, I get that. You know, you could always throw money at people, but if they're unhappy because they just don't feel right, they're not liking what they're seeing around them, they're not waking up with a passion about like what they're doing in their jobs, it doesn't matter the amount of money you throw at them, they will leave. And I would say 9 times out of 10 of my friends who are working at security companies, and I've seen them move from one company to another, it's culture that they've told me. And I really drilled down into a little bit more why. And there's some little adage in there. They're not liking something about it. And it's not just because they're like, well, you know, there's a pea under my seat. There's a little bit more to it. But, you know, I'm not going to get into, you know, like the exact reasons why, but I just like to point out that there's this underlying theme during this quote unquote great resignation that's still kind of going on, that in order to maintain that workforce that you want, you know, as a manager and the security strategy that you're trying to look at, just really focus in on make sure your managers have this really good connection with the teams. And then the teams are promoting a really good workforce and team culture that, you know, people are, you know, connecting to. It's really hard to do, you know, especially since a lot of us are remote, but I'm just like, that's my last little thing I would say to managing a proper workforce. That's all I have. So again, just to review the 3 things that are really highlighting on a proper security strategy and organizations, focusing on people. Number 1, you know, from a workforce management, do not miss on this. You know, technology is constantly changing. Always properly realign your workforce to align to your technology base, working with IT, working with what's currently you're supposed to be doing, working with what is currently on-prem, off-prem, and what you're going to be outsourcing for your organizational needs. Looking at maintaining what you have from both junior level, mid-level, and from your managers and senior level techs that are on your team. From testing your overall strategy through red teaming, your overall organization, highly recommend tabletop exercises. From a policy standpoint, do not just throw policy into the mix that someone else wrote. From a compliance standpoint, write a policy that actually works. Write a policy that meets your organizational needs. It is worth your time to address, worth your time to write, and write a playbook that actually is going to work for your organization. And then finally, watch out for culture. Nothing will destroy your workforce faster than a culture that doesn't meet your organizational needs. You want to maintain that workforce, and maintaining your workforce will allow your organization to grow and prosper through any incident that's out there. Thanks, everyone. My name is Rob Lee, and I'm going to pass it back to Stephen Hart.
Rob, that was awesome. I'm seeing a LinkedIn user saying, thanks, Rob, for touching on the toxic corporate environment, how it impacts the workforce. It is a real prevalent problem that many organizations just don't want to address. Good stuff today, man. I appreciate it.